Hello, hello, welcome. I am Dr. Rorschach. I think one of the strongest qualities a man can have is when they can say they were wrong about something they said or predicted. A year ago, I confidently told you that 2024 would be a horrible year for film. And I come to you as a humbled man today to say that 2024 was an average year for film. We had some really high highs, but there were moments that we had depths of hell lows, to the point that for the first time ever, I felt compelled to make a top 5 worst movies of the year list, which you can catch in the separate video. 2024 was a bizarre year for film and probably the most unoriginal year for film ever, as if you look at the top 20 highest grossing movies of the year, in the States at least, 17 of those 20 were sequels or prequels. We're at this very strange point where we're now making movie adaptations of Broadway musicals that were spin-offs of movies. It's like this full circle thing that we're now doing. So when we eventually get Beetlejuice the musical, the movie, we have nothing but general audiences to blame for stuff like that instead of something original. This year was also the extremely random year of the movie popcorn bucket craze. Like, what's up with these popcorn buckets? Every major movie this year seemed to have some wacky popcorn bucket you could buy at the theaters while watching it, with even myself buying a few of them. But for now, I want to focus on the good stuff, and in some cases, the great stuff. Every movie I have seen this year will be commented down below in the comments section, and I do think I have seen most of the big stuff this year, with a few exceptions like The Brutalist, which just doesn't have any availability in my city as of now. And I also did want to bring up a movie called Perfect Days, which had its initial release last year overseas and came to America this year, but for that reason it can't be a contender on my list, but it will be coming up in my honorable mentions before number 1. So without further ado, let us talk about the top 10 movies of 2024.
What was your name again?
Chris. All my friends just call me a Wang Wang.
What should I call you?
First up, we have a movie called Didi. Didi is a coming-of-age comedy movie about a Taiwanese boy as he goes from middle school to high school and the many escapisms he uses to cope with his struggles. First and foremost, I am an absolute sucker for a coming-of-age story, but what Didi does that's so great is that it shines a light on coming-of-age struggles for children of immigrants. And I really admire how this movie tackles showing first-generation immigrant parental struggles and themes like internalized racism. I also really admire this movie for how it shows the middle school experience in a year like 2008. As someone who was born in '97, I can really relate to this movie on that aspect, as it shows things like MySpace, Facebook, YouTube, instant messaging chat rooms, and how these brand new things influence a very young generation, and how that impacted us at such a young age, and how it transformed how we communicate as people. But overall, I think Didi is a very solid film, and I think a lot of young viewers are going to find many ways to connect with this movie.
Legend says ape and human lived side by side. Impossible as that may seem.
Next up, we have Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, the 4th installment of the modern Planet of the Apes films. As someone who loved the past Planet of the Apes trilogies that we got throughout the 2010s, I found myself to be a bit nervous about this 4th Planet of the Apes movie, just because that last movie, War for the Planet of the Apes, had such a perfect ending. But thankfully, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes finds a really good way to justify its existence. Like the other movies, this one explores interesting themes of humanity behind these apes, with this one touching more upon the ideas of things like colonialism and fascism. I really liked the time jump of this movie to kind of see how the world has evolved since the end of the third movie, as several decades have passed. And this movie is a great contrast to the past trilogy because we're now in a world that is almost entirely apes, and we mainly follow all ape characters with very few human characters. Obviously, the lead attraction behind this movie and the other Planet of the Apes movies outside of the story is just the groundbreaking motion capture CGI we get here. I mean, the hair, every fine detail on the apes here, just as good as the past movies, if not the best it's ever been. I mean, it looks as realistic as humanly imaginable right now. But the real showstopper here is this movie's villain, Proximus Caesar.
Apes will learn high. Will learn.
Proximus is this really interesting character and really portrays how ideas and beliefs of former leaders can be misconstrued and lost over time. And so I really love that about this character. Proximus is very much a bad ape, but you know, I could kind of just sit around and listen to this guy talk for a while. And this year has been just such an incredible year for movie villains, and we're going to talk about a few later on in the video.
Scary being a lady FBI agent?
Yeah.
Take a nice long look.
Next up, we have Longlegs. First off, I really want to address something that really irked me about the discourse surrounding this film. Every year there seems to be a horror movie that will come out that a lot of film nerds seem to get riled up about and praise, and sometimes overpraise, but then normies will kind of come into the movie and say, well, that movie wasn't too scary. So I want you to read my lips here, just in case you fall into this category. Good horror does not equal scary horror. So many people want a boo in your face kind of horror experience when they go and see horror movies in the theater. And if that's what you want, that's fine. But I'm really tired of these people not understanding hype behind films like Longlegs. And some of the greatest horror of all time doesn't have you shaking in your seat. Look at movies like The Shining, and look at movies like Silence of the Lambs, for example. Side rant over. Longlegs is a crime horror movie that follows a psychic detective who is trying to track a serial killer behind a string of family murders. This movie has this real eerie, dreadful atmosphere to it that I really liked, and it's able to cast a lot of anxiety onto the viewer as they're watching. And this movie is a really, really good slow burn that I think helps build it up in many ways as you're watching along. And it reminds me of a lot of this video game I've played called Alan Wake 2, and it really encaptures this kind of atmosphere and feeling, similar to like a Twin Peaks feeling too, if you've ever watched the show or the movie. But the real circus leader behind Longlegs is Nicolas Cage as the titular character in this movie, because yeah, he's doing the Nicolas Cage stuff and all of his mannerisms, and the dial is definitely turned up to 11. So if you love or dislike Nicolas Cage's mannerisms and stuff like that, can be the make or break for you in this movie. But if you do love Nicolas Cage style movies and humor, and you like really good atmosphere in your horror, then I really do think you should check this out, because this does feel very much like a modern horror classic we got.
The Pope is dead. The throne is vacant.
Next up, we have Conclave. In comparison, Conclave is probably the most normal movie on my list this year, because it's just a normal drama film with some mystery elements to it, but the ensemble cast here and the well-written screenplay really carry this film as one of the best this year. This film is about the process of how the Catholic Church picks a new pope, and I not only learned a lot about the papal conclave, I also learned a lot about the political election this real world thing resembles and just how political something like this is. Things like secrets, resurfacing past scandals, contrasting personal ideologies of what the Pope should say and believe in, and power-hungry candidates throughout this film make this a whirlpool of religious politics. This film shines a light on an interesting election process that I imagine most people who aren't a part of Catholicism really know about. But yeah, there is a phenomenal ensemble cast here with the likes of Ralph Fiennes, John Lithgow, and Stanley Tucci, just to name a few. And they all have such great chemistry together and varying ideologies that their characters bring to the table here. It's very interesting to see things like the local priests contrast and conflict with each other, and not only that, but seeing them conflict with priests from across the world, and how it's just this big political event, and how they feel like they need to band together to prevent the wrong person from getting power as the next pope. This is just a phenomenal movie, and I feel like I learned so much from this.
Potential to actually heal you. The implications are life-changing.
The face is falling off in clumps.
I'm sure it only looks like clumps to you.
Perhaps any potential risk is worth it.
Next up, we have A Different Man. Probably the most unknown movie on this year's list. A Different Man is a black comedy with the premise of a man with an extreme facial condition who is suddenly able to get rid of it because of this secretive experimental surgery, only to then see a man with the exact same facial condition come and take over his life, and then get everything he's ever wanted in life back when he was that person. I really love cautionary tales like this movie, and I think it really greatly emphasizes the age-old expression of not only be careful what you wish for, but the grass is always greener on the other side. But this movie expresses these things in a very humorously morbid way. The movie has a bit of a slow initial build up, but once the plot is fully established, this is a really good dark comedy. And Sebastian Stan really shines in this movie with his reactions to seeing someone steal his past life and past identity almost that he was taking for granted. This is a very funny but also just a thought-provoking film, and definitely made me reflect on the things in life I should be more grateful for, while also giving me some really great laughs.
My mother was magnificent. And he took it all from me.
Next up, we have Furiosa, a Mad Max saga. Simply put, Furiosa has the sauce. This film is a perfect companion piece to Mad Max Fury Road, one of my favorite films of all time. And it also just gives much more backstory to characters introduced in that film, while doing some really cool world building to the wasteland that I loved. It kind of goes without saying, but the action here is phenomenal, and every single scene is just absolutely insane and inventive with what they can do with these vehicles in the desert. But the biggest surprise of this movie was actually Chris Hemsworth as the villain of this movie, Dementus. He's not only the best part of the film, Chris Hemsworth kind of has a career best performance here. Dude was having so much fun and is the most memorable part of every single scene he is in. Director George Miller really understands the formula for filmmaking, which is show, don't tell. And I'm pretty bummed out that this movie did flop at the box office and that we probably won't get another Mad Max film. But still, at the end of the day, this is a phenomenal movie, and I'm very, very thankful that we were able to get this movie this year.
Injection unlocks your DNA and will release another version of yourself. This is The Substance.
Next up, we have The Substance. I'm normally not the biggest fan of body horror because I feel like so much body horror relies on things like shock value. But what I was completely blown away by The Substance is this film is a great horror film and has a lot of dark satirical comedy throughout it. There's also a lot of really good social commentary in this with things like women's beauty standards and ageism as well. In many ways, this is just a 2-hour episode of something like Black Mirror or The Twilight Zone, but a good episode of Black Mirror, if you know what I mean. Do be warned, there's a lot of gore, there's a lot of nudity, and there's a lot of disturbing body shots in this movie. But from the beginning to end, this movie is batshit insane. And the final 30 minutes of this movie just will stick with you for a while. But yeah, I loved every single thing about this movie, from Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley being this kind of reflectionist character and bouncing off of each other. Dennis Quaid is hilarious in every single scene he is in. The cinematography here has this really heightened, in-your-face kind of style that makes every single shot phenomenal. And there's a lot of classic film homages here. You can definitely get a lot of references here with a lot of Stanley Kubrick films such as The Shining and 2001: A Space Odyssey. This movie also has a bumping soundtrack. I've ordered this soundtrack on vinyl and you'll just be seeing someone's life ruined before your eyes, and then the banger will just start and you're just like... It's incredible, really. The Substance was probably the biggest surprise for me this year because this movie came out of nowhere and is by a French female film director of all things. So it is really cool to see a woman's take on body horror, a very male-dominated film genre. But I would just really recommend going to this movie blind if you can. Don't really read up on it. If any of this sounds interesting to you, just go into it blind and just get the full experience.
Standing before me was death. But I'd never been so happy.
Next up, we have Nosferatu. So this is the latest movie I've seen on this year's list, and I actually had just seen it the day of recording for this. So it is possible that this movie could go up or down on my placement as I have more time to digest the film, but for now, this is where I'm putting it. I found it super interesting to learn that Nosferatu is just the original German adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula, with the main difference being that in Nosferatu, the villain is much more of a monstrous creature, while in America, we've been much more focused on making vampires sexy for some reason, which we're still doing to this very day. The first thing that I really loved about Nosferatu is that it's not this watered down, spooky type of movie, because this movie isn't a phase mom, it's goth. My favorite modern film director, Robert Eggers, got to make his passion project after a decade of talking about it, and he has masterfully remade the classic Nosferatu. Lily Rose Depp's possessed performance here and Bill Skarsgård's complete transformation, and in many ways one that surpasses his performance as Pennywise, are both top tier performances of the year. This movie also had my favorite costumes and movie sets that I've seen from a movie this year, and all these small details throughout the film really take you to this early 1800s time period. But my favorite part of this film, just like all of Robert Eggers' other films, are the visuals. This movie is filled to the brim with this twisted and sometimes disturbing Gothic visuals that provide this great visual storytelling with just how tormented this world is and the people that are living in it are. Nosferatu is the best classic monster adaptation that we've gotten in well over a decade, and I highly, highly recommend this film if you want to see just this masterfully made film.
If I get married to an American, I wouldn't have to go back to Russia.
Okay, so we should marry.
And you, Anora, take this handsome gentleman.
Да я был с ним 2 недели назад буквально. Он не женат.
My runner-up for best movie of the year is Anora. Whenever I discuss these movies, I try not to be too much of a nerd and harp on the directors behind the film, but I do really want to bring up the director of this film, Sean Baker. Sean Baker is an extremely talented director, and something I really appreciate him is how he tells stories about these marginalized subcultures in America, primarily with immigrants and sex workers. And in many ways, I think Anora is his magnum opus. Anora is this almost Odyssey style film about a stripper who falls in love and marries a young Russian playboy who is visiting America. And without saying too much about this film, it's really remarkable how this movie is basically sectioned off into 3 different genres of film throughout its runtime. The first third of this movie being more of a modern Americanized Cinderella story, with the second third somehow being a slapstick Three Stooges-like comedy, and then the third being more of just a traditional drama. And I would normally call a movie like this to be confused or conjoined, but Anora just transitions all of these sections very beautifully and blends all of it just so masterfully. While I liked all parts of this movie, I'm just so surprised at how hard I laughed in this movie. This is the hardest I laughed in a movie all year. For about 45 minutes, this is just non-stop belly laughing humor. You're having such a great time in this movie in that middle section there, and then that just makes the drama in the third act of this movie hit you in the face so much harder and bring you right back down to the earth. Lastly, Mikey Madsen is phenomenal here, and she not only gave my favorite performance from an actress this year, but I fully expect her to be leading award season this year, and she will most likely get Best Lead Actress for this movie. All right, and before we reach number 1, we are going to go over just a few quick honorable mentions for the year. Our first honorable mention is Perfect Days. Perfect Days is this really beautiful film that follows a Japanese bathroom cleaner in Shibuya, Tokyo. This is a very powerful film about introverted people and the lives they live every day. I really wish this film could have been a contender on the main list of films this year. Our second honorable mention is Challengers. Challengers is a love triangle film centering on 2 athletes and a man-eater woman. This movie has a ton of cool twists to it and really keeps you on the edge of your seat throughout the entirety of its runtime. And last honorable mention we have is Sing Sing. Sing Sing is more of a statement film than a story film, with the film centering around the theater department of a real-life prison, and the film is actually using formerly incarcerated actors, which is really cool to see. But also, to the film's credit, Coleman Domingo, the lead actor here, gives my favorite lead male performance from an actor this year, and I think he's going to win some awards for this film as well.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope! May thy knife chip and shatter.
And lastly, my movie of the year is Dune Part 2. As someone who was born in 1997, I never really got to experience these legendary initial theatrical releases of things like the original Star Wars trilogy, or even the Lord of the Rings movies. But walking out of Dune Part 2, that is the closest I will ever feel to like I just saw a monumental moment in film history. I have seen many movies that really embody the theater experience, but quite frankly, none of them come close to what I felt and experienced while seeing Dune Part 2 in an IMAX theater. I could compliment every single aspect of this film, from the pacing, the cinematography, the dialogue, special effects, and the grand scale and weight of the film is consistently on display here. Everything here is masterfully done by Denis Villeneuve, and I wouldn't change any small detail about this film. This is a perfect film, and the film craftsmanship here is impeccable. Beyond all that, my biggest takeaway from this movie was just how impressed I was with Austin Butler. In this movie, he really does steal every single scene he is in, and he's probably the most memorable movie villain we've gotten in the past decade. Almost as a form of an Achilles, I will say Dune Part 2 just doesn't quite compare watching it on the home screen. So if you haven't seen it yet, I do kind of feel bad for you because I'm not sure if you'll ever have the chance again to experience it on a large scale IMAX screen. And if you did get to experience it on an IMAX screen, I hope you feel the same about this. But Dune Part 2 joins the ranks of Terminator 2, Blade Runner 2049, Aliens, and The Empire Strikes Back as not only one of the greatest sci-fi movies of all time, but one of the greatest sequels of all time. And for all of those reasons, Dune Part 2 is my movie of the year. And so that is the top 10 movies of 2024. Moving forward, I'm not too sure what to expect from film in 2025, but I do think there are a lot of upcoming movies that do show a lot of promise. So I am going in very hopeful for good films next year. But if you made it this far, I do just really want to say that I appreciate you watching and the support you've given me. And I do just want to remind you one last time that I do have another video out for the top 5 worst movies of 2024. So please do give that a watch if you can. As usual, I am Dr. Rorschach. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a nice 2025.